So in this video, I want to talk about Premier Skins. Specifically, I want to make a wish list for Premier Skins, and I want to give every single character a Premier Skin in this video. Now, keeping in mind that that is going to be quite hard. For example, Catwoman is a character that doesn't really have a lot of options for a Premier Skin, because unfortunately Cheetah is kind of the closest thing to Catwoman. So I've kind of got a little bit of a workaround for her. First of all, for Black Canary, I would go ahead and give her a White Canary Premier Skin, because White Canary is a very popular character in the CW universe. She's gone from being a side character on the Arrow TV show to being one of the main characters of the DC Legends of Tomorrow TV show, and it makes perfect sense to work her into the game. Next up is the Flash. I personally would go with Jay Garrick, but you have plenty of options. You could do Kid Flash, Impulse. There's so many different speedsters that you could do with the Flash, but again, I would go with Jay Garrick because he is the furthest thing from the Flash that it might justify giving you a Premier Skin instead of just trying to use gear. Next up is Atrocitus. I would go with Kilowog and I forget the name of the squirrel. I think his name is Chip. Obviously, Chip would be the replacement for Dexter, and Kilowog would be the replacement for Atrocitus. Next up is Aquaman. I would go with Black Manta, and I know that he's not exactly the most accurate replacement. You could go with somebody like Ocean Master, or there's many different options you could do with Aquaman, but I personally would go with Black Manta just because he's already a part of a stage transition on Atlantis. And I think Black Manta probably has a slightly bigger fan base than a character like Ocean Master, just because Black Manta was in the Young Justice show, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong about that. Next up is Gorilla Grodd. I personally wouldn't give a Premier Skin to Gorilla Grodd, but if you had to give him one, I would go with Solavar. He's not the most accurate representation because he doesn't have telekinetic powers the same way Gorilla Grodd does, but I do think he's the most iconic gorilla among all of those gorillas other than Gorilla Grodd. Next up is Wonder Woman. I would go with Wonder Girl, just because Wonder Girl was a member of the Titans in the Injustice world, and she's quite a cool character as well. Next up is Robin. Most people would go with a character like Tim Drake, but personally I'm going to go with my first gender swap, Katana, because I actually think most of the movements that Robin makes in-game based off of the gameplay trailers we've seen of him, Katana could replicate, other than, like, the gadget stuff. But they can change that up in the animations. That will still effectively be the same ability, but obviously it will be Katana performing them. I think that's totally possible and plausible. It's just whether they want to go that route is completely up to them. Next up is Deadshot. Obviously, I'd turn him into Deathstroke. It's the most easy representation. Unfortunately, though, Deadshot does not use a sword in the same way that Deathstroke does, so most likely if Deathstroke was to be added to the game through a Premier Skin, he would not use his sword, which is quite unfortunate, unless it was like maybe in his grab animation, and probably his super as well. Next up is Catwoman, and unfortunately this is one that I've had to kind of stretch a little bit. We can't really make this an entirely new character. I did talk about this at the start of my video. I've actually gone with a classic Catwoman 1970s outfit. Very, very different from her standard outfit. Unfortunately, you could probably just pull this off with a gear system, so there's no need for this to be a Premier Skin, but it's the only one I could really come up with for Catwoman. For Harley Quinn, I would go with the Suicide Squad Harley Quinn, but of course, Suicide Squad was quite a while ago, so maybe we won't get that. But if we were to give her a Premier Skin at launch, I think it would be most likely to be the Suicide Squad. But again, it's hard to tell if that's going to happen because you would need voice work from certain people that you're probably not going to get. Next up is Blue Beetle. Hyman Reyes is our current Blue Beetle, but obviously I would switch him to Ted Kord for the case of a Premier Skin. Next up is Cyborg. I would go with a Teen Titans Cyborg just to get in a good guy Cyborg. Unfortunately, the Cyborg we're going to see in the game, in the context of the story, is quite an evil character. He's trying to break Superman out of prison, etc. A little bit on the wrong side of history there, but the Teen Titans Cyborg is a good guy, right? So this would be a way for you to get good guy interactions with Cyborg. You just switch on the Teen Titans Cyborg. Next up is Black Adam, obvious answer being Shazam. Next is Green Arrow. You could go with somebody like the Dark Archer or one of the Green Arrow villains, but I've decided to go with Red Arrow just because I'm a huge fan of Roy Harper. I think he's a really cool character and I hope they end up using him in some form. Now with Firestorm, I'm having a bit of a rough time. I can't really decide between two options. Both of them are from the CW show. When the character was first revealed, I thought he was, in fact, Jefferson Jackson, but one of you guys pointed out to me that it wasn't. It was another character named Jason. So for my premiere skin for Firestorm, I personally would pick Ronnie Raymond, but I would put him in a traditional Firestorm costume. Unfortunately, in the CW TV show, Ronnie Raymond never really got to use the traditional costume. But if they did want to do a CW skin and not have it be Ronnie Raymond, you always have the option of Jefferson Jackson, who's been doing a fantastic job on the CW Legends of Tomorrow. Scarecrow, I would go with Sinestro Corp Scarecrow, even though it wouldn't be, you'd have to suspend your disbelief a little bit, because if you did have him in-game, he probably wouldn't be able to use his Sinestro Corp abilities outside of his, grapple and super, because that's really the only thing you can change. Everything else has to remain true to what Scarecrow can do normally. Next up is Green Lantern. I would go with Tomari, just because I think he's a really cool character. There's plenty of options you can go with for Green Lantern, though. You've got Guy Gardner, Kyle Rayner, but again, I would go with Tomari. Next up is Brainiac. Brainiac's a little bit hard because we don't really know how he's going to play, but just for simplicity's sake, I've gone with Brainiac 8. Now we've got the Joker. I would go with the Trickster. I know some people have mentioned that Red Hood could possibly be a premiere skin for the Joker, but I think more likely we'll just probably see Red Hood as DLC. So I'm going to go with the Trickster here. Trickster is a very similar character to the Joker, and it could be a good excuse to get Mark Hamill's voice in the game. Obviously, Mark Hamill has voiced the Joker in the past, but he's also voiced he hasn't voiced, but he's actually played the live-action version of the Trickster on multiple occasions. So I think it would be super fitting to have him voice the Trickster as a premiere skin for the Joker. Next up is Supergirl. With Supergirl, you actually have two different options, and I'm okay with either of them. You have Allura, and Allura is, of course, Supergirl's mother, or you could go with the unborn child of Superman. We got to see her in some, alternate, it was like a dream sequence for Superman. He had a dream of his perfect ideal daughter that he would have had where he didn't go evil, and that daughter is actually a really, really cool character. We didn't get to meet her for very long, but it'd be really cool to see her in the game as a premiere skin, especially when it came to her voice interactions with characters like Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, all those characters that she ended up meeting in the dream sequence. Remember, these premiere skins don't need to be canonical. Obviously, they can be canonical, but they don't need to be. Next up is Swamp Thing. I would go with a bit of a deep cut. Most people won't know this character, but it's called Snowman. I honestly don't know a lot about this character because, again, yeah, it is such a deep cut. Not a lot of people know this character at all. But because of that, you do get to stretch some disbelief. For example, you can stray a little bit away from the comics. As far as I'm aware, he doesn't have the ability to control snow in the same way that Swamp Thing can control the green. But again, he's such a deep cut, most people won't know this character. You can kind of play around with this. I would personally, if I was making a premiere skin for Swamp Thing, I would definitely go with Snowman, and I would obviously change him from the comics, allow him to control snow the same way that Swamp Thing controls plants, and it would be a really, really cool effect for Swamp Thing. You'd basically have all the same animations, but make them all snowy and add more particles and things like that. I think it would look really, really cool. Next up is Dr. Fate. I would go with Linda Strauss. Linda Strauss is a very cool take on Dr. Fate, and it's also a big enough visual change from the original Dr. Fate to justify having a premiere skin. Also, there would be a reason for new voice lines. Next up is Batman. I couldn't find a male character that I was really happy with a premiere skin for Batman. I personally would go with Batwoman. Batwoman is a very, 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 very cool character. I actually didn't know a lot about Batwoman before I read the Injustice comics, and I actually really grew to like the character quite a lot. She seems a lot more like Batman than, say, a character like Batgirl. So I would really, really like to see her be a premiere skin, or like to see her in any form. I'd love to see her show up as DLC even. Next up is Darkseid. Darkseid is kind of a hard one because he is so unique in so many different ways. He is the quintessential powerhouse of the DC universe. But unfortunately, there aren't very many characters that are able to stand up with him, that have similar abilities to him. He has actually looked very similar throughout his entire existence in the comic books and animation and everything. So it's really hard to come up with gear for him, or even a premiere skin for him, But if you had to come up with one, it'd probably have to be somebody like Anti-Monitor. For Captain Cold, I actually recently had to change this video. I already had this video made a while ago, but I needed to come back to it to change it because my previous pick for Captain Cold was a metahuman Captain Cold, but based off of the footage we've seen of Captain Cold since then, he's very, very tech-based. He's a very non-traditional look for Captain Cold, so I'm going to change my answer for what premiere skin would you like for Captain Cold to CW Captain Cold. Obviously, there would be a reason for no voice lines, because you'd need to go get the actor from the show to do the voice lines. Also, it's a good reason to have a premiere skin because it gives him the traditional Captain Cold look. He's even got the fur coat. I know you can't see it in this image, but that's just because of the camera angle. He totally has a fur coat, and I really like the actor that plays Captain Cold, and I'd love to be able to play him in-game. This next one took all of my intelligence to come up with. I feel like no one else is going to come up with this one. Quite frankly, I'm pretty sure I'm a genius, and it is going to be the final one for this video, and that is Bizarro for Superman. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to come up with one for Cheetah or Bane. So they're the two characters I didn't get in this video, and I do apologize for that, but again, I just couldn't come up with any. Also, the thing about Cheetah is, again, she's very unique. There aren't very many people like her, other than Catwoman, and Catwoman we already know is a separate character, so thank you guys for watching this video. I want to start doing more Injustice 2 content, but really there's not a lot to do until the game comes out, so I do apologize for that. Once the game is out, though, I will be creating a lot more content for the game, and I'll see you in the next video.